What is racism? Racism is hypocrisy. In 1776, a group of tax dodging, slave owning white men came up with the propaganda laden slogan, "All men are created equal." They came up with that slogan at the same time they were dehumanizing people that were kidnapped and enslaved from their homeland. About 100 years later, the Emancipation Proclamation, quote unquote, freed the slaves and let them be, quote unquote, free in a country where more than 50% of that country was still under the impression that those people weren't people. That impression was so profound that the government of that country gave financial reparations to the white people who were forced to no longer have tyrannical, murderous, rapist, and torturous ownership over those people. Today, that same government is trying to remove the history of those people from our classrooms, trying to make it more difficult for those people to vote, all the while making it easier for those people to be put in prison. What is racism? Racism is cowardice. We force, we indoctrinate children to recite the Pledge of Allegiance as early as kindergarten. Children have the words, "One nation, under God, with liberty and justice for all," branded into their brains. At the same time, the same country is too afraid to actually live by those words. The same cowards who wrote an antiquated document in 1776 are the same cowards who want to brainwash children as early as 6 years old with the idea that this is a fair and honest nation. A nation confident enough to face the truth about a Spanish colonizer who performed a genocide on the indigenous people of a land that he was wrong about, that he got lost, that he thought was India. And to this day, we still use the word Indian. A nation strong enough to admit when it was wrong. A nation unified enough to stand in solidarity with its mistakes and embrace them for the future and the betterment of its people. A nation ready and willing to not only learn from those mistakes, but also to be secure enough to teach its people about those mistakes and how to learn from them. A wise man once said, "History might not repeat itself, but it often rhymes." What is racism? Racism is religion, more specifically Christian nationalism. A Jewish preacher who lived in northern Africa has become the symbol of the white religion in this country. A Jewish preacher who founded his beliefs on equality, treating people with the same respect you'd want them to treat you with. Be kind and generous to people less fortunate than you. Allow your heart and your home to be a refuge for anybody seeking refuge. A black man who attempted to unify people of all types. And what are the teachings now? Xenophobia, transphobia, homophobia. All because of a incredibly long-winded document that has been transcribed by old white men for centuries. There are zero references about being a homosexual. There are zero references about being a transgender. There are zero references to abortion. There are zero references to an all-white society being superior simply because of the amount of pigment that one has in his or her skin. Do a quick Google image search of the entity known as Jesus Christ. Brown hair, blue eyes, surrounded by angels who are white. The most iconic image of the Christian faith, the Last Supper, is a Jewish Seder. Let that sink in. What is racism? Racism is capitalism. This country was created, this country was built on the strong backs of free black labor. The capitalism system was only allowed to exist because the country did not have the resources or the wealth to pay for labor. So they found a way to do it for free. Black people built the White House. Let that sink in. Black people started their own stock market in Oklahoma, and a group of hypocritical, cowardly, quote-unquote Christians burned it to the ground. This country became the global leader of money in 1917 when it went to bed with war. World War I marked the first time a country could literally create money. Use that created money to create instruments of war, establishing the military-industrial complex. Many will tell you that the military-industrial complex is nothing more than a relationship between the country's military and the defense industry that supports it. Until the white man's casino, Wall Street in New York, created a way to make huge profits from war out of thin air. And who invested in war companies? White men. Look at what happened. Look what's happening today. Who doubled their wealth from $750 billion to $1.5 trillion over the last 19 months during the most crippling economic and social pandemic in history? 10 white men. Why did 5 million children go into poverty? By taking away the child tax credit. So white men could save $60 billion in taxes that they were trying to evade and would have evaded anyway. When white people get financial aid from the government, it's called subsidies. When black people get financial aid from the government, it's called welfare. Meanwhile, over 70% of people who are on welfare are white. What is racism? Racism is law enforcement. The first police in this country had one assignment: find escaped slaves, brutally beat them, and bring them home, quote unquote, to the old white man that owned them. The man on the face of the $20 bill was the same man who offered up to 325 times that amount for the return of a runaway enslaved person, including extra money for every 100 lashes inflicted upon that man. He was a master planter who fertilized American soil with Native American corpses and hydrated southern cotton fields with the blood and sweat of free black labor. Such a sign of white supremacy was he that was all a cop in Minneapolis needed to kneel on the neck of a black man, murdering him over 9 grueling minutes while the world watched him do it. If a black teenager had his mom purchase him an automatic rifle, cross state lines, and walked into any crowded street, perhaps during a protest, law enforcement would have shot him before he even reached the street. Instead, that same law enforcement gave a bottle of water to a white teenager who just killed people, and a white judge pardoned him. What is racism? Racism is generational, hereditary ignorance. My parents were raised by white, predominantly drunk Germans, the true plague upon humanity. Germans. I was raised in the purest form of white supremacy you could imagine, and the utter ignorance of white supremacy has never been more clear than in 2022. It's no longer enough to simply not be racist. You have to be anti-racism, because the longevity and how it's being passed down from generation to generation means it's not only not stopping, it's growing. The infestation continues. If a white person claims to not be racist, but makes a racist joke, they are a racist. If a white person claims to not be racist, but says things and then defends those words with, I wasn't talking about anyone in particular, they are a racist. If a white person claims that they want to learn more about racial injustice, but then wants to find a quote unquote neutral party to teach it to them, they are racist. How many racists do you now know that you didn't know before? What is racism? Racism is the capital. During the Black Lives Matter protests of 2020, every other step of the United States Capitol had armed men 6 feet apart. There was no mentioning of anybody from the Black Lives Matter movement going to the Capitol. There was no mentioning of them doing anything at the Capitol. But they were close. They were close enough. January 6th, an orange fascist hillbilly pedophile, twice impeached piece of shit, sends a white mob to the Capitol. If that was a mob of people of color or of black and brown people, they wouldn't have even made it to the steps. And finally, what is racism? Racism is sports. Blaine Gabbert, Colt McCoy, Jarrett Stidham, Mason Rudolph, Mike White, Mike Glennon, Geno Smith, Case Keenum, Jake Browning, David Blau are all being paid over $1 million a year to not play football. All of those guys are being paid over $1 million a year to study a playbook, play catch, and go into a football game if somebody gets hurt. Meanwhile, a 3-time playoff record holder, a man who was 1 play away from being a Super Bowl champion, is still unemployed because he took a knee against racism during the most antiquated and unnecessary act of any profession, period. No other line of work on earth is forced to sit through a terrible song before they start their jobs. And make no mistake, and you can color it up in your own mind however you want. I'm sure you've probably convinced yourself of a lot of other things. The football field is their office. If you're a football player, your office is the football field. To all you accountants, to all of you people in sales, do you have to sit there and listen to this song before you start? Until recently, college football was the purest form of modern-day slavery that I had ever seen. A large group of white people thought that paying predominantly black athletes in textbooks, pens, and pencils was enough for them to risk bodily harm, the longevity of a quality of life, to make a school more money. The changing landscape of college football is finally evolving with the times, and young, predominantly black athletes are being given opportunities to finally earn money that they should be earning in a capitalistic society. And look who's still trying to keep them from making money. Old white men. What does racism mean to you? Does it mean not saying anything mean? Does it mean not saying anything racist? Does it mean continuing to use the word Indian? And newsflash, there are no Indians here. Never were. Never have been. There might be some now. But they moved here from India, probably for a job because they're really smart. smarter than us in a lot of ways. How many people in your family are racist? How many people of your family carry that hate? How many people in your family hide behind a cross, calling themselves good people? What Martin Luther King stood for, what Martin Luther King lived for, is something that is so simple, it shouldn't have to be explained. And if you do need it explained, you are a part of the problem. If you think that the Black Lives Matter movement is a terrorist organization, you are the problem. And you better take a good fucking look at the FBI and the CIA if you want to talk about terrorists. The same terrorists that use an airplane that cost them $950 million to drop tens of thousands of bombs that cost $100,000 each. And they drop them on a tent. Predominantly on tents. If you truly think that if that mob on January 6th, that mob of terrorists, wasn't white, that they would have even made it to the steps, you are a part of the problem. We need to evolve. We need to improve. And that can't happen until a lot of people look in the fucking mirror. What Martin Luther King was would have been 93 today. Did you know him and Anne Frank were born the same year? It's not long ago. This isn't ancient history. This is actual history. And as I said, history might not repeat itself, but it often rhymes. In 1951, outside of the nation's capital, 50,000 KKK members marched for white supremacy. January 6th, they attacked democracy for white supremacy. How are you going to be evolved? How are you going to improve? What are you going to do if you hear somebody use the N-word? If you hear someone say something transphobic, homophobic, xenophobic? What are you willing to do? Because if you are someone who wants to say something, say it. Say it. Stand up. It is time for the good people of this country to stand up for what's right and stand against what's wrong. And that's all Martin Luther King wanted. That's all he ever wanted. I'm not going to be one of those people who sit here and quote all of his amazing quotes. You can read them online. But it seems to me that more and more people need things explained to them these days. Yet they consider themselves smart. What are you willing to do when your uncle over the holidays or at a family reunion says a racist joke? What are you willing to do if you hear a white person call someone of color whatever word they choose, whatever word they want to use at that time? What are you prepared to do? Because until we're prepared to actually improve, we're not going to get any better. Until we're prepared to actually stand against tyranny, we're not going to get any better. And that's all Martin Luther King ever wanted. It's for us to live up to our potential. We say we're the greatest country in the world. Fucking prove it. Because we're not. I've never seen more division. There's nothing united about the United States. The second largest state in the Union just passed a law saying it's immoral to teach kids that the Ku Klux Klan was immoral. They have removed the writings of Susan B. Anthony. They have removed teaching history of Native Americans. If you can't see the racism in this country, then open your fucking eyes. Because that's all Martin Luther King wanted. That's all he wanted. For us to actually live by our words. We say all these words, all right? You're not a man, you're not a good person if you're not a man of your word or person of your word. So be someone of your word. Justice for all men are created equal. It's a fantasy. And a lot of you need to wake up. And that's all he ever wanted. He never wanted war. He never wanted hate. He wanted unification. He wanted to be unified. And if a 7-year-old African American child is old enough to feel racism, then a 7-year-old Caucasian is old enough to learn about it. Hypocrites, cowards, fake Christians. You are the plague. And that's all Martin Luther King wanted you to know. Look in the mirror. Be better. Do better. Speak kinder. The pigment in someone's skin is irrelevant. And the atrocities that this country has done to people of color. There is not a nation more guilty of it